Our first candidate is Bruce Rafert, who is provost at North Dakota State University. He was nominated by Dr. John Haller, who served as assistant provost in Illinois. Bruce was previously vice provost and dean of graduate school at Clemson University. He also has ties to Florida. He graduated from UF and did postdoctoral work at USF. He also was a professor of physics at Florida Institute of Technology in Melbourne. Bruce, welcome. We want to give you 5 to 7 minutes to offer opening remarks and specifically talk about why are you interested in exploring this opportunity. Bruce?
Well, thank you, Chairman Hassini, members of the committee, others who are interested in the future of higher education in the state of Florida. It's a great honor to have been selected as one of the 4 finalists for the position of Chancellor for the State University System Board of Governors. And it's great to be back in Florida. I'm delighted to be here and to meet each of you. And I'd like to extend my regards to the other finalists as well. I have prepared a 3 to 4 minute set of comments that I think will give you a little bit of perspective on my past experiences, the way I might align with your key 3 priorities, and I'll leave plenty of time for what I'm assuming will be a brisk and lively and productive discussion that will follow. So I'll begin. As we're all aware, access to quality, affordable education is one of the key economic drivers that all of our states face. And it's also becoming increasingly critical to the competitive position of the United States around the world. There are key challenges that I believe that all of higher education faces. Certainly they're faced here in Florida: recruiting and retaining and completing the best of the best students, recruiting and retaining the best faculty, and drawing from the many strengths of diversity. And certainly that's one of the features of the system that was very attractive to me when Randy first called and the opportunity was presented to me. I feel that these challenges require a new level of situational awareness. I think I said in my cover letter, data-inspired, reflective consultation, and brisk and effective action. In higher education, we're becoming stretched thin just at the very time when our states and the nation need us most, when expectations are rising from every quarter. But really, at the end of the day, it comes down to that special interaction between the faculty and the student. I like to say it begins and ends with that, and that has to be something that's foremost in our thoughts as we build our governance structures and set our strategies in motion. New paradigms of learning, workforce development, online distance education, immersive and virtual learning, performance funding, Common Core, K through 12, better balanced. These are all issues we deal with every day. The continuum of technologically inspired innovation provides a fertile landscape for both efficiency but also potentially for quality. As one example, when I was at Clemson, I used technology to advance the Clemson Graduate School to #1 on Google. And what happened at that point in time was everything changed, everything. Suddenly we had students from around the world who were aware of the quality programs we possessed. Many came to realize their dreams of graduate study in the United States by paying full non-resident tuition, either by themselves or by their governments. It's provided a tremendously needed boost on the revenue side of the equation at Clemson University during a time of serious state disinvestment in higher education. I've refined and distilled that process, and now at NDSU I'm building a global network of 100 universities, broadly speaking, are working in a portfolio of food science, food security, agriculture, nutrition, and public health, with the objective of making some contribution to non-infectious chronic diseases that now are one of the world's most vexing problems. I'm delighted to have this opportunity to discuss how the state university system, one of our nation's largest and most diverse systems of higher education, can respond to these challenges, harness new innovations, and sculpt an approach that sees it become the #1 state in education in the United States. First in higher education is first in everything. As I noted in my cover letter, my career has spanned a number of major leadership roles in higher education, of rapidly advancing responsibility, beginning as a faculty, then a department chair, a dean, a vice provost, and a provost of what is now one of the most positively dramatic Carnegie Very High universities in the United States, ascendant in our 5-state region during a time of federal and state austerity. I believe the success has been built on a focus on situational awareness that spans education, government, legislative and executive branches, as well as the corporate sector. Many of the opportunities to serve have been accomplished in both public and private universities in Florida, where I've had special attention on forging partnerships between state government and research and workforce development. As I noted, I currently serve as Governor Jack Dalrymple's representative from higher education on the North Dakota Economic Development Board. That's the organization in North Dakota that's charged with strategic planning for the economic development of the state of North Dakota. Recently joined its executive committee, and in turn on a reporting group that's writing up the report on how the state's most recent investment of about $7 billion in a broad strategic framework called 2020 and beyond, how effectively we made use of those funds. Prior relevant experience in Florida includes an array of STEM-centric, legislatively enabled activities really aimed at the workforce, mostly in the area of space science. So thank you very much for the introduction. I would also like to point out that I was a postdoc at the University of South Florida, and many of the partnerships that I had in the area of space science included the University of Central Florida and a consortium activity at Florida International University. Makes me remember fondly those days when people would say, actually, he is a rocket scientist. And I have recently watched as the Florida Gulf Coast University has come out of the cypress swamp in Fort Myers, which is my wife's hometown, and have been inspired to see it go from its beginnings to nearly 15,000 students in an incredibly short amount of time. My foremost priority for the state university system will be work with the board, mobilizing new resources, implementing board strategies at state, national, and global scales. We will use both traditional as well as seek new box-free approaches to address the traditional requirements of access, diversity, and efficiency, but I hope to do so within a pathways framework that gives every student a career-rich set of opportunities to chart their career. I believe that a necessary component of this comprehensive goal will require Florida to work to build excellence and distinction on a broader front. Since graduate school at the University of Florida, I've always believed Florida should have at least 3, if not 4 or 5 or 6 institutions in the AAU. And I see that as an imperative of excellence that the new chancellor must advance. One thing I've learned from a long career in higher ed is that the discussion of how to provide the many needs of higher education does not proceed in a vacuum, separate from discussions of state workforce development with the legislators, the executive branch, and industry. And a close and intimate relationship with industry is really essential. But also, it's difficult to proceed without discussions of image, really marketing of the many advantages that higher education provides to lifestyle, opportunity, and competitive strength. In North Dakota, we started calling this portfolio of education, workforce, and image the trifecta. Success in one of those 3 areas is not possible without success in all, and we are linking them together. I think this would be something well worth investigating. For example, we've linked together the Department of Tourism in North Dakota, not quite the size of the Department of Tourism in the state of Florida, but nonetheless many beautiful sites, and tourism is a large and growing industry in North Dakota with higher education, with affordable housing, with a broad array of offices across the state that share common interest. I'd like to provide one example about how there's feedback between higher education, workforce, and image. In Fargo, North Dakota, currently there's 1,700 Microsoft employees. The plans Microsoft has are to grow another 1,000 employees over the next 2 years, adding a considerable amount of infrastructure to their campus in Fargo. I'm not certain, but I'm pretty sure that Microsoft didn't come to Fargo because of the snow, the wind, the minus 20-degree temperatures, the blizzards, the annual flooding of the Red River. I could go on and on. They came to Fargo because of an amazingly talented workforce, a Carnegie very high institution, and a state that is business friendly. And in coming to Fargo, they brought the Microsoft brand and image with them, which provides feedback to the entire process. They're helping us develop what I'm starting to call the digital prairie. I'd like to circle back to mention one thing about higher education I feel must be addressed, and that's the topic of retention. I think Florida is doing well, better than the nation for sure, but to me it's difficult to speak about affordability while citing the statistic of 6-year degree completions that might be 50, 60, 70, or even 80%. Now, how about the other 20%? Where is the ROI in that? This is something where we can and must do better to align curriculum, advising, tracking careers across all programs. Even a partial solution of the retention problem provides for substantial improvements in efficiency. I feel that an increased focus on core business of the university, courses, degrees, and careers would also lead almost immediately to a substantive increase in impacts. Perhaps later we can talk a little bit about how development of a 5-tier tuition model in Clemson created a totally unexpected positive set of impacts. And by the way, I should mention I'm particularly proud of being part of early discussions some years ago in Florida when Jeb Bush was Secretary of Commerce that led to the formation of Enterprise Florida, the Technological Research and Development Authority, and my favorite at the time, the Spaceport Florida Authority. In this regard, it's not so much to me about ask not what the state can do for higher education, but rather asking what higher education can do for the state. And that transition in North Dakota, that transition of perspective, has led to an array of legislative initiatives that include 40% gift credit on donations made from individuals, corporations to state universities, $30 million matching proposal for those gifts. We've catalyzed a new epoch of charitable giving through legislative activity. In closing, let me say I believe in the power of partnership, the strengths and solidarity of purpose we on the board will have with the students, the faculty, the institutions, the legislature, and the governor. And I know that while there's power in overarching vision, that vision without resources is delusion. So we must always test every initiative by the impact it has on our state's precious resources. There's great potential within every student and faculty in the state of Florida, within every Floridian. I feel we are not just educating or training the next generation of workforce, we're inspiring the next generation of leaders who are going to become those thought leaders that shape the future of the world. Truly, first in higher education is first in everything. Second in higher education is second, third, or less in anything. Thank you for the invitation to meet with you. I look forward to our discussions.
Bruce, thank you so much. That was excellent opening. The way we're going to ask questions, I'm going to ask a couple of questions, then I'm going to ask our Vice Chair Tom Coons, and then we're going to go down to Manoj and then Pat. And then next candidate, we're going to start with the Vice Chair and go down, and the third candidate, we start with Manoj, and then the fourth candidate with Ms. Frost. So My first question is this. If you get this job, what would you do in the first 90 days?
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair, for that question. Certainly, it will begin with reestablishing my personal network within the state of Florida as quickly as possible. That would begin with meetings with the Board of Governors leadership, the staff in the system office. I would also anticipate the need to immediately make contact with each of the institutions. I'd travel there as quickly as I could to each one. I have opportunity to meet with the president and senior leadership of the member institutions. At the same time, taking guidance from you all at first to identify the key legislative and executive members that I would need to have a working relationship with. This is a replay of what I was able to do in North Dakota. I can see, of course, the challenge here is somewhat more substantial in that basically I had the opportunity to meet both the governor and both of our state senators the first week I was on the job. It was because of the compact nature of the legislature in North Dakota. That would be the beginning. Maybe that's the first 20 days. I should be able to accomplish that, I think, within a 2 to 3 week period. And I think then beyond that, it's I don't know how frequently that the board or the system has town hall type gatherings, but that might be an appropriate course of action to take next to get input not just from individuals but from larger groups with whom it would be impossible to meet specifically. I've already begun my review of the strategic plan, and again, it's one of the things that has attracted me to this position. Very impressed with the structure that the system has for accountability and data. I think I said I was data driven, but really I feel I'm data inspired. That data wins, according to IBM, and it's always good to be sure you have the facts before you have the solution. Then I think beyond that, it's a matter of building those relationships with thought leaders in Florida and seeking a focus on what I would hope to be some of the topics I mentioned in my introduction. Academic excellence, retention, and the details of articulation of the curriculum, working from the strategic down more to the tactical, more to the day-to-day interactions that actually make the system work effectively.
You mentioned something about the 5-tier tuition at Clemson. Can you explore that with us?
Yes, yes, Mr. Chair. I've always, although I'm a physical scientist with a lifetime of experience in STEM areas, I've always had a fascination with the business models of the universities I've worked at. And what I noticed when I was hired as the Vice Provost and Graduate Dean at Clemson University was there was a very traditional one-size-fits-none tuition model. So there was an in-state and an out-of-state tuition model. And some of the interesting features of that model were that since there was just the one rate, that for many programs it was too low to attend to the needs of the programs, and for other programs it was too high and students were deterred and would go elsewhere. And I think this is one of the things that I've learned over the years is to be able to look at a complex problem and dissect it down to tractable portions where simple solutions can be applied. And the simple solution in this case was the creation of a 5-tier tuition model where each individual program was really just an IT issue of how could we code it in the computer. Each individual program was given the opportunity to undertake an analysis and find a market appropriate rate for their program and to select one of the 5 tiers. And I also introduced a rule set that allowed programs to advance upward or downward by one tier as perhaps their program strength grew and they were more market competitive, or they found that they were having difficulty attracting students and needed to have a different tuition structure. But the net effect of that was a dramatic increase in tuition as we got the pricing positioned correctly for each program. I don't know whether that would be an effective strategy in Florida, the size and the size of the system and the autonomy of the 12 institutions, but I think it's an option that would be worth exploring. And when this was developed first at Clemson, there was really quite a range of opportunity for individual departments. So there was a hold harmless feature to it, but there was also an incentive to it to do better.
Was that at graduate school or all of Clemson?
That was at the graduate level.
Graduate level.
So my role at Clemson was the graduate dean, and it was my responsibility to reverse a declining graduate enrollment, which I did, and over the next 7 years we doubled the number of doctoral students, the number of graduate students, and I think almost doubled the tuition through the 5-tier model. And as you might imagine, there's quite an array of details that come with the operation of a graduate school, let alone an entire university, that's going to be difficult to capture in a discussion that doesn't take a day or so. But they're very familiar with that landscape and how a balance can be struck between the resources which are provided by the state through an allocation to minimize the burden on our resident students, but then to offer opportunity to students from other states and other countries whose dream it is really to come to Florida for their studies.
So let's say that so a doctorate degree in mechanical engineering, for instance, it was more expensive, let's say, than philosophy or psychology or something like that. And so you all looked at the cost of each degree produced, and thus that's how you came up with the tuition?
That's correct. I mean, there was a cost model that I developed, but also we looked at pricing of our colleagues in other states. I hesitate to call them competitors, but really that's what they were, because we're all after the same students, and we want our students to stay in our state, and then we want to have it all, and we want to have everyone else's students leave their states. So there's a market force in play there. And at the graduate level, there's also an array of global forces in that many of our research university graduate students are supported on graduate assistantships, either as teaching assistantships or as research assistantships. So that opens the door for other opportunities where government agencies, other countries, not-for-profits, multinationals, organizations like Fulbright, CONACYT, governments in Brazil and Chile have an interest in sending their best students to the United States for studies, both at the undergraduate and the graduate level. And there are an increasing number of countries around the world whose governments recognize the importance of higher education, are willing to subsidize or fully support their students' study in the United States. So it's not just a limited group of countries that we're all familiar with that have been sending students to the United States. Has become a very global phenomenon now. And again, both at the graduate and the undergraduate level. But Mr. Chair, I can tell you there is market sensitivity, and each of those countries and each of those students and their parents are very attentive to the cost of education. So the quality, the quality value proposition has to be just right. So it's really the value proposition is what we were investigating.
So you used the cost and marketing modeling to come up with the...
Yeah, and an interesting thing is in STEM that there's many reasons that we have for increasing the number of STEM graduates in the United States. So immediately this calls into question the strategy of pricing the STEM disciplines at a higher level. They are more expensive. However, there's a shortage of STEM students, and so we need to find new ways to explore how we have a business model that allows us to succeed in having more students come rather than just trying to charge them more money, which is actually a deterrent.
Thank you so much.
I can see you all understand exactly the nature of this problem.
And I totally, listen, we deal with that ourselves. So with that, I'm going to turn it to Vice Chair Coons.
Thank you.
Governor
Good morning,
Coons.
Dr. Rafert. Thank you for coming. Welcome back to Florida.
Thank you.
It's a little warmer here, I suspect.
Yes, indeed. It snowed on me yesterday morning.
Well, it's Florida's the place to be. We have been working hard, or especially over the past year, on developing a performance-based funding model for our universities. And it's a difficult transition because we have been, in the past, either having funding be based on student levels in our universities, or in some years there's been very little funding to argue over, so it wasn't as important of a question in those lean years. But we're moving forward with a performance-based funding model that is going to, I think, transform how we do business in the state of Florida. And what I'm curious and just wondering is, do you have experience with performance-based funding metrics? What metrics do you think are important, and just what's your overall view of performance-based funding?
Okay, well, I'll begin maybe in reverse order. I think that performance-based funding is something whose time has come, and that the growing expectations for performance in higher ed, the clarion call for efficiency, performance funding gives us the opportunity to not let the topic of quality get lost in that discussion. So I think that there are many different ways different states approach performance funding. The North Dakota legislature has started performance funding this year. I'm on the very small group of individuals in our task force to determine how, in our case it's a smaller amount, $5 million of performance funding will be allocated amongst the universities. But I think we should focus on metrics which bring quality and value, not just on numbers, impersonal numbers of credit hours given, A's, B's, C's, or D's awarded, or students who succeed in achieving their degree. Clearly those are important, but at this point in time I see that the debut of performance funding, where a state is introducing it, is best focused on quality metrics. And I think...
Can you give a few examples of...
Well, I think what Florida has done in terms of looking at student success. So you graduated, so we can count you. But now what? What are you doing? Are you staying in the state? What's the type of employment you're seeking? Did you make use of the degree that you've just received, or did you go off in some other sector? Mm-hmm. So I mean, we're trying to identify this beyond ROI. We're trying to be sure we have the ROI, but beyond that, what are the potential there for something really special happening? And I think the research universities have a special set of challenges that I think few understand, and it has to do with being competitive for research funding, so that the federal agency provide, in the case of Florida, well, I know the total research funding was cited as $1.7 billion system-wide per year. An enormous percentage of that comes from the federal agencies, NIH, NASA, DOD, DOE. Our faculty compete nationally for that funding. As many as 5 or 6 or 7 proposals will be submitted for each one which is successful. The interesting thing is some of those agencies require matching funds. So the reward for a university to succeed in competing nationally and being given an award, that institution is immediately confronted with the need to find hundreds of thousands of dollars of matching fund. And typically it'd be 1/3 or 1/2 the total award is a matching fund. So I think there's a way there to really get out in front of the crowd with performance funding. So that's recognizing quality, that's recognizing excellence, that's recognizing performance. And I think it's a game-changing concept.
Just maybe a few follow-ups that are related. On the subject of tuition, we have one of the lower levels of tuition in our state, and it's a subject of a lot of conversation. So some believe we should be raising tuition in order to ensure excellence, delivering an excellent product, and we're at the lower end of all 50 states, probably in the bottom 10 of level of tuition. Others argue, well, that's something to be proud of because we have low tuition, but we are delivering an excellent product already. Tell me, before I follow up with that, tell me how you feel about tuition levels, where we are in the state of Florida, and what your philosophy is on tuition.
Well, undoubtedly, that's the single most complicated facet and challenge of the system beyond the one I've already mentioned, which I feel is retention. You know, in the case of retention, investments are made, tuition is paid, resources are provided, faculty time is used, and in many cases, 3 of 10 students don't complete their degree. I can't imagine that being an acceptable way of building an automobile, where 3 of every 10 just don't make it off the assembly line. And it certainly has a host of impacts on society. But then with tuition, you know, how I think really what you're asking me is how do we populate the institutions with the numbers of students we're going to need to be successful as a state in 2025 if we make it unaffordable for them to do so. And so that is a difficult challenge. You know, one bookend is that the tuition cannot be so low as to render the mission orientation impossible. You know, on the other hand, it can't be so high as to lead students into crushing debt or simple inability to participate and causing them to go somewhere else. So I think the way forward there is not to have a one-size-fits-all tuition. You know, for us to explore ways that institutions have some autonomy, and I know that the state has moved in that direction with the differential, which I think is a very positive step. Financial aid would be another topic. Fundamentally, I think those who can afford the cost of higher education because of their situation have a obligation really to pay tuition. I know that's what I did when my son went to college, and I saved for so many years, and I got my parents to help, and I found a way to, even though my bank book at the time read 0, to you know, to find a way to float the package with the long view in mind. Now I know that I have many, I had access to parents who could help, and I had access to resources that perhaps others don't. And those are the families and individuals we need to be thinking about.
Thank you.
That the traditional definitions of need-based aid will bear a hard look.
Just last question quickly, because I know we're taking a lot of time. You've mentioned several times graduation rates, 6-year graduation rates. What do you think, just throw out a number, what is the target that you feel is the target that the system should be looking to achieve?
The numbers and the goals I felt obviously have been the result of deep study. So I felt the numbers were very good. There were a few I thought, just from my own perspective, I would like to go back and look at again. And
so if you just had to pick a number, your
about
definition of excellence.
I was thinking somewhere about 5 to 10% as a stretch goal above the numbers that are currently in the 2025 matrix.
Okay.
And I know that that's part of the first 90 days, is to get a handle on the possibility or the impossibility of that. I don't know the process that generated these numbers. I'm sure it was good, and I was very positively impressed by the goals that the state of Florida has set. Again, my own feeling is that there were several where it is possible to do better, and if we could, it would have tremendous impact.
Good. Thank you very much.
5 or 10%.
Thank you, Governor Hussaini.
Thank you, Governor Kuntz. I'm going to turn now over to Governor Chopra. Governor Chopra.
Welcome, Dr. Rafert. I have a couple of questions, but something just came to my mind right now. It appears, even with the recession, that North Dakota has done well. It's maybe not milk and honey, but definitely oil and agriculture. I'm looking
And
at
snow.
an article from yesterday that says North Dakota budget's tripled since 2003. It's a different situation. How would you handle the more difficult budget problems we have, particularly with communications with the legislature?
Well, certainly there's no doubt that a long period of very conservative planning and strategy in North Dakota has borne fruit. There's really three markets there. There's energy, there's agriculture, but there's a new emerging market, and that's high tech and manufacturing. So there's always been a strategy of diversification, and I think that's something that is bearing fruit. I've been in North Dakota a little bit over 2.5 years, but before then, I spent 9 years in South Carolina, 7 years in South Carolina, 9 years in Michigan, and then before that, a lengthy period of time in Florida. At the time I was in Michigan and South Carolina, I think the state cut the budget virtually every year. So I'm well aware of the differences that one can find in states based on higher ed, and I think they were political environments very similar to that in Florida, and it was values held by the citizens and the legislatures were very similar. And as I've indicated, it was in Florida that I first really became interested in that interface of economic development and higher education as a professor. I've followed through on that ever since. So I think there are many, many things, low-lying fruit, if you would, that are available to someone who has the ability to spot them.
In your application, you've stressed the word effective communication quite a bit. So let me combine this. As a Chancellor, your interaction with faculty, with students, and with the staff is quite limited because of your hectic schedule and your day-to-day work there. How would you nourish this interaction?
Well, let me just start by saying that, reiterating that I think that's important to sustain that interaction at an appropriate level. The success of higher ed does begin and end with that interaction of the student and the faculty. We might need 2.1 million students in the year 2025 according to the Lumina Foundation, and we might currently not be on a trajectory to have them, but nonetheless we graduate them one at a time. And there's a host of ways that I could see the Chancellor's schedule allowing for interaction with groups of faculty on curricular matters, on research matters, but certainly that's something that would have to be scheduled in advance, and possibly groups of faculty.
On a follow-up to that, then you probably have to interact more with the Board of Trustees and the presidents. How would you work with that group? Is there something in your mind as far as your approach?
Well, my approach there would be to establish both a professional and, if possible, personal relationship with each university president and with their Board of Trustees. I would be, if you offered me, the chief executive of the Board of Governors, and I think there's a host of messages that are common to the institutions that come out of the Board of Governors. We are an advocate for the entire system and its success, primary liaison with the legislature, and I think it's necessary to capture the accomplishments and the strengths of each institution, and those accomplishments and strengths frequently are measured by successes of individual faculty or departments or colleges.
To your knowledge, from what you've gathered up to now, do you think the balance between the power of the Board of Governors and the Board of Trustees is about right now, or is it tilted?
I don't really have the perspective. I've done, since Mr. Goying gave me a call, I've done considerable reading on the topic. This is all new since my time in Florida.
Sure.
Although I'm well acquainted with the activities of the prior governance models when I was in the state. And I think that certainly the key strengths of the system are its resource base, its size, its advocacy. But it is, in geologic time, it is new. And I think many of the business relationships between the trustees and the Board of Governors are undoubtedly still being developed. Mm-hmm. And it would be my objective to be a catalyst for continued positive development. And nothing works better than a few successful partnerships.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Governor Chopra. Now I'm going to turn over to Governor Frost. Pat?
Thank you very much. First of all, I want to say welcome back to Florida.
Thank you.
We're happy to have the opportunity to hear some good things about people who had once gone to school here and worked here. It's nice to know that your career started out in the state of Florida and now it's taken you to higher heights. I mean, makes us all feel pretty good, I think. And I think you're to be commended to say you're in a state now, as everybody has pointed out, that's a growing state also, but it's nothing like the state of Florida. And from what I can see and what you've said today, partnerships, the power of partnerships is very, very important, and I think some of those questions were addressed because, as you know, our system has changed dramatically, where we had university boards of trustees sort of operating independently, then we had a board of regents, and we've gone full circle. But now we are having to, you're going to have to be the one, if you're chosen, to be able to work with that board, university board, as well as our goals and so forth. And there's a little conflict here and there, but I'm sure you'll be able to do it because you've shown us that you do have leadership skills and you certainly have achieved a lot. One of the things that I want to ask is this, that our focus and your background is STEM, obviously, but one of the challenges in our state has been how to provide programs for the students coming in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. And we think about this as a priority, mainly because that's what the workforce now is sort of demanding. But then there are students who come that really don't want to be part of this. They take a course in mathematics, they take a course in something else, and they're saying, I want a degree in art history, or I want to be in philosophy or psychology. How do you address this? Because we've had a lot of programs that university presidents have had to cut because, number one, maybe there are a number of students in there, but is that really, should we be cutting them or not? That is now a big question for us. And I know, online education might be the answer. I'm not sure. You've had some experience. You know we're going in that route. How do you handle that?
Well, let me offer up a twofold response. I think higher education has yet to successfully, fully make the case about the value of the arts and music and history and language in their relationships to STEM, period.
That's good.
My experience, which really began during the time I was at Michigan Technological University, was that our corporate partners were very reluctant to engage with us when all we would talk to them about would be calculus and statics and dynamics and STEM material. They were interested in having an employee who had a lifestyle of attracting people who had a diversity of interest. And it was only when the university started investing in the arts that we discovered a renaissance of activity with our corporate partners. So I think that that's one thought. And again, I don't know how fully such strategies may or may not yet exist in Florida, but certainly I would be in favor of increasing them in working that dialogue from the lifestyle side. So I'm talking about what I was referring to in my trifecta as image. I've recently at North Dakota State helped formed a school of music with a PhD in conducting. So we are a STEM-oriented institution that happens to have a very renowned music program and a PhD in conducting. So I think there's just part of that dialogue that institutions of higher ed who are STEM-oriented need to be more proactive and need to do a deeper dive and to articulate what the relationships of all the disciplines are. So if we have coursework in music or arts or language, then those are available to the STEM students, but they're also available to majors in those areas as well. So there's an opportunity for multiplicity of positive outcomes from one set of investments. And the second part has to do with what has really become a national debate about online education. So online education has been with us all for 40 years, back through sort of prehistoric days where we had big satellite dishes and direct video, to now we're online. We can stream video to all the social media. So it is affecting higher education. There are best practice models in online education, but I think what's most exciting is that the computational power that exists now in commonly available consumer electronics, such as PlayStation or Xbox, and the graphic rendering there, and some design languages that Microsoft has built, which are already being widely used in K through 12, have not yet been studied fully, systemically, for what roles they might play in the future of not so much online, but immersive or virtual education in the future. And I did have the opportunity during my time in South Carolina to serve as the chairman of the board of what was the Carolinas Virtual World Consortium and then became the National Virtual World Consortium. I think there are it's a very interesting time to be working in higher education. And it's critical that we have a situational awareness that it is big enough to include all of these new things. My wife, by the way, serves on a number of arts boards in North Dakota, and we are extremely interested in the arts and supporting the arts.
I appreciate your answer. I really do. I noticed also that in your application you have listed many grants and contracts that you've been involved with or helped get for both, well, almost every one of your job locations. And you're also quite involved with students, professors, and so forth in publishing papers. It's a very impressive list. It's a long list. Some places you're the first author, sometimes you're last author, two places where you should be, and some place in between. Are you telling us that you were actively involved in these things, or were you the advisor to some of these people, or what's been your role there? Because, as a chancellor, it's going to be not like this, but it's in a way similar. What's been your role with all of this?
Well, I'll first state that you'll see that in the chronology that many of those activities where I would have been the principal investigator on a grant or the lead author on a paper have declined rather sharply since I took on my job as provost.
Yeah.
And the way I see this, and I'm involved in many such searches myself, is that the type of individual that I feel is appropriate to hire is someone who wants to remain involved in their research and their students, but has the good sense to realize that they cannot. And so that would remain my motivation, but clearly that type of engagement is not possible given the time demands for this position. Now, the roles there were many. Many included my students as well. And in science, there's a first author, second author, and in some of those, you'll see I'm a member of an international collaboration that will have over 100 authors. So there's just an array of different activities that I've had the privilege, really, of participating in that I realized several years ago that despite my attraction to that was no longer compatible with the position. But I certainly remember the types of things that made me and other PIs successful, that promoted scholarship, how incentives could reach down through an institution, not just at the institution level, but down through the college and the department. So that's just a detail that I hope is possible to retain with this position. Position may be so big that I have to sort of draw the focus up a few levels. I have no doubts that I will be very familiar with each college and each of the 12 institutions in a short period of time. The departments, the programs, there's such a large number of them, I'm not sure that's possible.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I don't have any other question. I'm going to ask the rest of the panelists if they have any follow-up questions.
No, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I just, on the
Chopra.
basis of the last discussion, in the past, when the budget situation was better, the Board of Governors itself supported research initiatives. Right now, all we do is try to go for LBRs. If the situation improves, do you think we bring back these ideas where we can have a system-wide approach towards some major centers, major research initiatives?
Well, absolutely. Thank you for bringing that point forward. I was thinking similar thoughts myself, that rather than waiting passively for the budget to return, proactively pursue various opportunities in certain areas. And at first, it may be that the areas are defined by what is available, what would work. Might not be coverage of all of our strategic areas of interest, but it would be a start. And I'm specifically thinking about initiatives that would span the system, at least two, if not more, of the institutions. So large centers. And obviously in Florida, there's many of the universities are quite capable of competing individually for large centers. And if we can do that and we can succeed, then there's no reason to upset the apple cart. But in other cases, there are advantages of size and partnership where we're competing with other states who currently might enjoy a competitive advantage over us.
That's right.
In which case, I think the Board of Governors would be ideally positioned to help catalyze, let's say, multiple university and research. I call it big R, small d, research and development initiatives.
Thank you.
Good question, Dr. Chopra. Dr. Chopra represents our faculty,
Yes.
which we call them the lifeblood of our universities, and we're so proud of Dr. Chopra. It's a great example of, what we have in our fantastic group of faculty in our system. Bruce, fantastic answers. Thank you so much. You have a great credential, and we appreciate you coming over today. Do you have any question for us?
Well, Thank you, Mr. Chair, and like to say I'm honored to have been selected for this opportunity, and I hope that you find my thoughts in accord with your own, as you interact with the other finalists and reach your decision. One question I perhaps would have for each of you, and this is to help me calibrate the board's expectations for the Chancellor, is to perhaps each of you let me know one thing you would expect the Chancellor to do, else you would view him not to be successful, and perhaps then one thing you would hope the Chancellor could do, but would think difficult to achieve.
I'll quickly answer that, and I just want to make sure that we don't run out of time. I would honestly tell you this. One of the part of your job will be is that, as you know, we have on our tuition, we are one of the most affordable state in tuition. And we are trying to increase the quality of education in our state, and this board, the Board of Governors, are absolutely after that. So to do that, it costs. So the job of the Chancellor would be to go to the governor and the legislators, which are very interested for our students to be able to go to school, and when they finish college, they don't have this big debt. As you know, our students have the highest debt now in our country, and so our governor and legislators are very aware of that, and they're trying to give the best education at the lowest cost. So it will be this person's job to convince the governor and the legislators to get the highest funding from the state for the education, because excellence cost. So that would be one of the most interesting. Would you like to add, Dr. Chopra?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. A couple of things. One, I think a strategic plan that is clear and transparent, so that all the constituents, all the 12 universities and faculty are clear as to what the system-wide approach is going to be as far as a plan. And the other one, the second question you asked, most of our institutions, including the University of Florida, have a very high faculty-to-student ratio, or student-to-faculty ratio, and some almost at the end of the spectrum. To improve that system-wise, I know we leave it to the local presidents sometimes, but to have an approach where certain institutions have already started hiring large numbers of faculty to improve the situation, but there are some that are left behind. And so the Chancellor hopefully can do that advocacy as well.
Absolutely. Okay. Thank you so much for coming. We really appreciate it.
And thank you for your thoughts.
Thank you.
It was definitely defined a set of expectations I would look forward to executing.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Just a few minutes. I'll go check to see if our next
Okay.
candidate's ready.
We'll take a couple minutes. Our next candidate is